Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Earth Day Everyday podcast, where we aim to spotlight exemplary activists, policymakers, and changemakers in the field of sustainability and climate change. I'm your host, Aryan Doshi, and today we are extremely lucky to be joined by Professor Mason. Professor Mason is a teacher in Earth systems and a documentary filmmaker, using his platform to convey important stories about our climate. Professor Mason, it is absolutely wonderful to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm here at the Stanford Farm right now where I teach, and I'm so excited to be talking about Earth Day and talking about climate change, talking about the planet. I really appreciate you for this invitation.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for taking time out of your day, out of your class to come onto the podcast. But maybe just to start off, right? Can you share a bit about how you became interested in creating documentaries, right? What was that motivation? And then why the connection to climate?
Sure. Yeah, great question. So I got to go a little ways back to when I was a teenager. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana, and the specific area of New Orleans that I come from, there's not a lot of economic investment. There's not a lot of access to resources and whatnot. And so growing up, I didn't have a lot of access to career pathways or
Yeah.
things that interested me, quite frankly. And so as I got older and became like a teenager, and was getting close to getting out of high school, I didn't have much direction. I didn't really know what I wanted to focus on
Yeah.
post graduation. Um, like a lot of young men where I'm from, when you lack direction, when you lack guidance and mentorship, you're bound to get into a little bit of trouble. And so I did. I got into a tiny little bit of legal trouble, nothing serious,
Mm-hmm.
like little misdemeanor things or
Yeah.
whatever. In that period of my life, I also was experiencing a ton of loss and trauma. There was quite a few people who I grew up with and who I played in high school, like football with or whatever, who lost their lives. Had some family loss around that time. And come to mention, talking about being from New Orleans, in 2005, Hurricane Katrina destroyed my entire community. And, what I didn't realize is that later in life, this is like 2009 when I graduated high school, I would still be dealing with a lot of that trauma and from that environmental disaster. So you multiply that with lack of focus, lack of direction, uh, lack of mentorship and guidance, lack of access to career pathways that interest me, multiplied with trauma and not being able to like effectively resolve my trauma. That was why I was sort of like, getting into trouble and doing some not so good things at the time. And so in the process of me sort of dealing with I was like on probation for a while, and in the process of dealing with that, I was on the campus of Dillard University, um, just kind of visiting a friend of mine at the time. When as I was walking around, this gentleman runs out of a building, coming straight at me. He's like, "Hey man, do you go to school here?" I was like, "No, I don't." He's like, "Oh well, do you have like an hour to spare? I really could use some help with something." And I was like, "Okay, cool, I got you."
Yeah.
So he brings me into the TV studio on campus. Again, I don't know this guy from a can of paint. He's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
total
Wow.
stranger, and it's a total like by chance encounter.
Good.
But he
Yeah.
brings me into the TV production studio on campus, and he puts a boom microphone in my head, and he's like, "Okay, just stand there and I'll tell you what to do." And as I'm standing there, I'm like looking around, and I see the big old camera. I see the lights. I see like the set decoration. I see
Yeah.
all
Oh,
these
wow.
people like running back and forth, like handling business. And, I see like the beautiful snack table that they
Yeah.
had set up. And, come to find out it was a film set. And I had never been on a film set. I had never been interested in film, had never just had talked about film ever before.
Yeah.
But from that moment on, I mean, I was captivated. I was hooked. And all of a
Absolutely.
sudden, like that one little bit of exposure to film as a career,
Yeah.
it motivated me to pursue it as a career for the rest of my life. So that was sort of my origins into filmmaking. Documentary filmmaking sort of just came
Yeah.
naturally
Yeah.
not long after that. I was making music videos, short
Sure.
films, working on different movie sets, like big and small productions.
Yeah.
And documentary filmmaking was just another part of that sort of filmmaker process. And so that goes on for a few years. I ended up becoming a high school film and media teacher
Yeah.
because I didn't want any young person to have to go through what I had gone through. I wanted
Yeah.
them to have access to this career. I wanted them to have training and education around this career and around media in general, so
Yeah.
that hopefully, like, it would inspire them to pursue it as a career if they so choose. So I did that for a while. The whole time I was an educator, I was also a filmmaker and working heavily in the film industry,
Mm.
usually producing or as a camera operator or
Wow.
cinematographer.
Yeah.
Um, and it wasn't until one of my best friends, his name is Edward Buckles Jr. It
Yeah.
wasn't until he recruited me. I mean, he and I were really like best friends, and we had
Yeah.
always been helping each other out with our film shoots all the time, right?
Yeah.
Um, um, we even like sort of like started a film production company together called House of the Young Entertainment. It was
Yeah.
really his baby, but he of course wrote me into the process, and I love the work that we were able to produce with that production
Sure. Yeah.
company. A part of that work, we started capturing interviews with people who were kind of just in our orbit,
Sure.
people who had gone through Hurricane Katrina like us,
Wow.
and we just started interviewing them about their experiences dealing with like the hurricane, post traumatic stress disorder, all the things, right? And it wasn't until years later in 2022 when we put the film out. So it took us like 7-8 years to
Oh
to
my
make that
gosh.
film.
Wow.
But it wasn't until 2022 where when the film came out and I saw like I mean, rave reviews. I mean, the cover of Time magazine,
Oh.
um,
Wow.
shortlisted for a ton of awards. Like took home, I think, 2 or 3 awards at the Tribeca Film Festival, including my best friend. He won like best new documentary director or something like that.
Yeah.
And when I saw the impact that it was having, not just only on the people of New Orleans and
Yeah.
my people, but also on like the world, and people were really gravitating toward this
Absolutely.
film. It wasn't until then, until 2022, that I realized, wow, like I actually have an interest in environmental storytelling. I have an interest in telling the stories of people who've been through environmental injustices and
Yeah.
shedding light on those issues. And
Mm.
so ever since 2022, the vast majority of my film work has been centered in the environment, especially like I said, like environmental justice and telling those stories.
Absolutely. No, that's that's a phenomenal story, Professor Mason. And maybe if I can just ask, right? A lot of the times, people who come out of ecological disasters, right, they don't get adequate amount of help, right, to come out of it stronger, right? But a lot of the times as well, right, people who don't experience these ecological disasters, at times they doubt the environmental crisis that we're facing, right? A lot of the times
Yeah.
in today's world, right, there's this sentiment of, you have to feel it to believe it, right? And so for people who haven't grown up in those disasters, right, they were fortunate to not go through that. But then at the same time, they become a doubter in what it is that we're all trying to solve, right? Is that something that you've encountered, and has being in the film industry helped you maybe counter that by creating, this story for people to see?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And I love the way you framed it as well. Yeah, so personally, I can't say that I've encountered many people who just like don't understand the gravity
Sure.
of climate change and environmental issues. Maybe it's because I'm from a place that is rich with environmental challenges, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm here in the Bay Area, another place that has its host of environmental challenges, and I'm working in a department here at Stanford that with full of people who have both personal lived experience, but also years and years of research into environmental issues. So the spaces that I occupy, quite often people understand the gravity of climate change and these environmental disasters. So personally, I have not encountered many of those individuals, but I am aware of them. I come from a place like Louisiana, where we currently have a sitting governor who just years ago called climate change a hoax.
Wow.
And we have an entire like you know there's a whole government structure in the state of Louisiana that incentivizes big business and oil and gas production, and they want to invest in non-renewable sources of energy that are actively polluting the planet.
Yeah.
And a part of that is one, money rules the world, and money makes the world go around.
Yeah.
Another part of it undoubtedly is people not taking climate change and the fact that the planet is changing and becoming less and less inhabit uh, less and less hospitable to
Yeah.
us as a human species. I think that there are a lot of people where I come from who, completely agree with like, that climate change might be a hoax, or, that it's not as serious as people make it out to be.
Yeah.
And so what film and storytelling and education for that matter has allowed me to do is to combat that sentiment. I'm able to tell stories where uh, I am not, I rarely ever center my own voice. I'm always talking to other people and a bunch of people. And
Yeah.
if 100 people are saying something, it's hard to just say, oh, those people are uneducated. They don't know
Yeah,
what they're talking about,
absolutely.
especially if they have personal lived experiences and they have facts and evidence, and science and history to back up what they're saying. Film and being a storyteller and an educator has allowed me the platform and the capacity to to be able to share those stories with
Yeah.
the people who need to hear those stories, but also with like the general public who perhaps might be not as familiar with some of the environmental challenges facing areas of the country. So yeah,
Yeah, and I think that's fascinating too, right? Because you talk about film, but could you maybe describe like that end-to-end process? Like what goes on behind forming the story that you do ultimately get to? Is it first you're drawn to the people? What is it that's, the most pressing issue, the most controversial issue? Like, is it starting off with interviews? Like, how do you sort of go from this is the topic I want to focus on to then creating this beautiful streamlined production that's able to communicate a story, right? There probably is so many different steps along the way to achieve that,
yeah,
right?
yeah, for sure, for sure, for sure. I love the way you teed that up. Yeah, so I actually teach this here at Stanford, and I've been teaching this for a while now, whether it was in the high school sphere or I had a nonprofit that I ran for a few years there, and now at Stanford, I'm actually teaching this on a day-to-day basis.
Uh,
So, um, yeah, so I think that the storytelling and the filmmaking process always starts with a spark, right? It
Absolutely.
can be, perhaps you were talking with a friend of yours and they said something that piqued your interest, right?
Mhm.
Or you're scrolling on social media or you're scrolling on your favorite media publication and there's some post or some article that really like catches your eye and you
Yeah,
know it makes you it makes you think and it just grabs your attention even for a moment.
yeah,
So it always starts with that spark.
absolutely.
And for me, that's how it happens. It happens just like in conversation with people. It happens by like, checking out media on social media or reading news articles or watching other documentary films. There's always some spark that happens. That
Yeah,
spark often leads to independent research.
yeah,
Like perhaps I just do a Google search about that topic, right?
yeah,
Or perhaps I go to a conference or a seminar about that topic to learn a little bit more, right?
sure, yeah,
And so then I have that baseline of understanding around the issue.
yeah,
And before I had perhaps had not even heard about it or didn't really care too
sure,
much about it, but now I'm interested, right? Now I've had the
absolutely.
spark, I've
Yeah,
done that independent research, and now I have a baseline of understanding. That baseline of understanding can only take you so far, however.
yeah,
At that point, got to start rallying information
for sure.
and the perspectives of people who know more about the topic than you. I call them experts.
Yeah,
And by experts, I don't just mean people who have, a doctor, a PhD behind their name, or,
sure.
who, have been teaching here at Stanford for 40, 50 years. Those people absolutely have a lot of value to add to the conversation. But I also talk about people who just, come from the communities that, I mean to tell the story about
For
because they
sure.
have personal lived experiences and their what they've been through and their perspective is just as valuable in my opinion as somebody who's been doing research on the topic but has never lived through it.
Yeah,
um, and so that's the next step is just to rally those experts, have conversations with them, build interpersonal relationships with them
for sure.
separate from the camera, like just having a coffee together or something, right?
Yeah,
And learning their perspective, learning their lived experiences, learning about what their research is based upon. And
mhm,
so you have an even deeper baseline of understanding and you have a even more wealth of understanding. At that point, you can come up with an idea for the piece.
mhm,
Often that looks like what's called a proof of concept. It
sure.
can be like a 2 minute video that sort of encapsulates the story that you mean, the longer story that you mean to tell later on.
Yeah,
Perhaps it's like a one pager that just details all the information that you know and sort of where you think the story might go. And once you have that proof of concept, once you have that one pager, I like to put together what are called decks, which is basically
yeah,
just like slideshows, like in Canva, or Google
Yeah.
Slides or whatever, that has sort of the point of the video or the point of the film has perhaps some visual references,
Yeah.
like the movies or TV shows that I really appreciate. It just kind of has, maybe the plot and just the overall synopsis of the story that I mean to tell.
Sure.
Once I have those resources, I have the proof of concept, I have the slide deck, I have the one pager, then I can start to rally more supporters to my cause, because film costs money. So I'm gonna need some funding to make this
Yeah.
film. If I can't fund it myself, I'm gonna need to recruit talented people to be on the crew with me. Camera operators who are more talented than myself, editors who are
Sure.
more talented than myself,
Yeah.
producers who have wider and more, like, who has like better networks than
Right.
perhaps I
Yeah.
have, right? And the one pager and the slide deck and the proof of concept is how those people can understand the thoughts that are going on in your mind,
Yeah.
right? And so then once you have like rallied a team, or at least the
Sure.
the skeleton of what might be considered a team,
Yeah.
at that point you can start shooting interviews. You can start gathering B-roll
I
footage and
see.
other content that you intend to make the film, or perhaps you maybe you don't intend for it to make the film, but it's all helping in your learning and your processing of
For
the
sure.
story. And so then that goes on for a long time. It could be weeks, it could be months, it could be years, like in the case of
Yeah.
Katrina Babies, right? The
Yeah.
film, the film that I made with my best friend on HBO.
Yeah.
Um, it could take years, and the process, all you're doing is trying to rally more voices to accurately reflect the community voice, to
Yeah.
accurately reflect the expert voices and the expert opinions and perspectives that you want to have in this piece.
Absolutely.
um, and so then once you got all of those interviews and you shot um, all of those different information gathering interviews and whatnot, then you can start adding in other pieces to the story, like the soundtrack, like the score,
For sure.
like you can start coloring the film, because color is very impactful in terms of how people engage with the film. You can
Absolutely.
start rallying other types of supporters, like people who work on the ground level, who maybe you could host a community screening with, or perhaps like they can ensure that a certain subset of people are going to attend the screenings or something, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
um yeah, and you just keep adding on, adding on, and adding on until you have until you have at least a rough draft. You get some feedback on that. That might just be your core group of people,
Yeah.
who know you and the film best. Then you do another draft, and maybe you invite more people into the process, like the producers, perhaps even the people who you interviewed.
Yeah.
And then you keep doing drafts until you have something that feels complete or nearing completion.
Yeah.
And that's your movie. And there might be a
Wow.
little fine tuning after that, but that's your movie. And of course, the second and last step to the process is, of course, marketing and publication.
For sure.
um, if you worked all these years to make the movie, you want to make sure that somebody sees it, right? So
Absolutely. Yeah.
you gotta start doing like strategic marketing and
For
figuring
sure.
out where you want the film to be placed in terms of like advertisements and
Yeah.
trailers, and what festivals you want to screen the film at. Start getting some of those oak leaves on
Yeah.
the like featured at this film festival, or winner of best award at
Yeah.
Sundance, or whatever it
Absolutely.
happens to be, right?
Racking up the accolades.
Um,
Yeah.
and then the last step, after you put the film out and it's on streaming platforms, or it's in theaters, or wherever its final home is, the last step, and I feel like most filmmakers skip this step
Yeah.
because it's so difficult to make a movie that once the film is out, you kind of want to just wash your hands with it and you're done with it. But
Yeah.
me, because I'm so invested in community, because I am a person who's lived through an environmental challenge,
For sure.
um, to me, the last step has got to be impact evaluation.
Yeah.
How has what I've created impacted the community,
For
the
sure.
larger like national community, the global community? Are people more informed? Are they inspired, or motivated towards some action that I wanted them to be
For sure.
inspired towards?
Yeah.
Um, did I do more harm than I helped? That's a question that we should always ask ourselves as storytellers. And so
Absolutely.
yeah, just ensuring that, and what that does is it ensures two things. It ensures that every step of your process is rooted in helping people because
Mm.
I guess that's at least who I am as a storyteller.
Yeah.
That's person. The second thing is everything is rooted in community voice. And but before you made the film, you were talking to people. While you were making the film, you were talking to people. Once the film is out there, you're still talking to people to see if you hit the mark or not.
Yeah.
So the filmmaking process is very long. It can take
Yeah.
years. It can take decades at sometimes. But overall, I think that going through that whole process is always worthwhile for me.
Yeah, I think, it's incredible, right? The small stages you get, you rally all these people, and then at the end you finally get these culmination of stories, right? But I think, like you were saying, probably one of the most important parts is realizing when to step out of whatever that niche field that you're working in. It might be working with documentaries, and then just asking yourself that question, right? Is what I'm doing helping people? And then if the answer to that question is yes, right? Immediately the work that you do becomes so much more purposeful, so much more meaningful, like you were talking about. So I think, that's incredible. And maybe more of on a fun note, right? Is there any sort of film that is related to sustainability that you either want to get out there or something you haven't seen yet, right? Is there any topic that you wish there would be a sustainability film on?
Mm. So I'm sure that these films exist, but if
Yeah.
we're talking about films that I really want to see that perhaps
Yeah.
I haven't
Or
that I
gain more
haven't seen,
attention. Yeah. More
yeah,
traction.
yeah, right. I think that all of us who inhabit the, the place known as the United States of America, we have got to try our best to understand the indigenous history of this place and how Native American communities throughout history have been stewards of the land, how they
Absolutely.
have learned to live with the land in spite of, the American, like, manifest destiny of like,
Yeah.
oh, this is our land and we can do whatever we want to do with it, right? I think that we all need to take notes from the Native American tribes that exist or have existed wherever we live, see how they were able to live as stewards of the land, um, and try to put some of those learnings into practice. For instance, I know in Southern California, like earlier at the beginning of the year, we had the crazy wildfires and stuff,
Yeah.
right? I believe one of the solutions to that is understanding the Native American cultural practice of controlled burning,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Describe
And
burns. Yeah.
I think that if we as like an American people in the California government and the firefighters or whoever, I think if they understood a little bit more of that practice instead of just brushing it aside saying that it's archaic and it's old
Yeah.
technology, perhaps we could have saved a lot of homes and perhaps saved some
Absolutely.
lives.
Yeah.
Where I come from in New Orleans was never meant to exist as an inhabited major city.
Yeah.
The city has always been set in like swampy, marshy land that was really
Yeah.
uninhabitable, right?
Yeah.
Um, but just the American way of doing things, we
Yeah.
decided to come and put our technology in it, and so we
Yeah.
started pumping all of the water out to try to make the community more inhabitable. And
Yeah.
now the city suffers from a multitude of issues, namely subsidence. We sit on average, the city sits 6 feet below sea level,
Wow.
and that's a big problem when you're surrounded on three sides by water. Right, we got the
Yeah.
Gulf of Mexico, we got the Mississippi River, and we've got Lake Bjorn to the east. So when you're surrounded on all sides by water, when your city is sinking, actively sinking, and already sits 6 feet below sea level,
Yeah.
and all around the world, water levels are rising because of global warming. It's a recipe for disaster. The Native Americans who lived on before us, right,
Yeah.
in the land when it used to be referred to as Bobancha,
Yeah.
talking about the Homa, talking about the Chitimacha, talking about the Choctaws,
Yeah.
what they understood was we can't we can't move the water out. We have to adopt like where we want to live with the river. So they lived along the natural levees that were like naturally above the water, and they were
Absolutely.
able to sustain for a long time until
Wow.
the European colonizers decided that they wanted to take matters to their own hands because they knew better, right?
Yeah.
And now look where we are as a city in as a state of Louisiana. So I think that I'm definitely a talker, so I know I'm talking a little too
No,
long
no, it's
here.
amazing. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that all of us, anywhere in this country, um, where Native American peoples lived or once lived. We have
Yeah.
got to try to get back to some of that indigenous knowledge because
Yeah.
perhaps old way of doing things can inform the
Better
new
than,
way of doing
yeah.
things.
Yeah. No, you stole
Without
those
that,
words out of my mouth. Yeah. I
yeah,
think in
yeah,
this era of sort of, technological advancements, right? I think there's so much from our past that we can go back, revisit, learn about, and, bring those to life, right? I think a lot of the times those have just been relegated to the periphery of our minds because we are just forced to adopt, these sorts of new technologies. But I think if we can go back to those more traditional values, those more traditional mechanisms. You were talking about the LA wildfires, right? Look at what we could have done, or where we could have been. So I think that's incredible. And maybe just a couple questions here, maybe before we end. Can you just talk about how can we more properly delegate aid where it needs to go, right? You were talking about
mm,
coming up from a background, living through Hurricane Katrina, right? Seeing that sort of visceral experience, right? Your house, tearing apart, losing friends, losing family, right? Is there some sort of program that we can create to help people who go through those sorts of circumstances? Do you think it should start off in the government, or do you think just maybe going down the storytelling path that you've gone through that can help be a force to educate people about the issue, right? How can we sort of effectively and properly delegate aid when it comes to climate catastrophes?
yeah. This is an excellent question and a very topical question given what's currently going on at the
Yeah,
federal level in terms of like freezing funding or completely
absolutely. Yeah.
dissolving different aid and community support initiatives, right?
Yeah.
Very topical question. So I'm not going to specifically name a specific organization or entity that I believe could do some good work because quite honestly, I know many nonprofits, NGOs, even like for-profit businesses that have a very clear sustainability model and do great work. So I'm not going to name an actual entity, but what I will say is, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I think that we, as policymakers, as leaders, as people who are trying to work towards change, we
Yeah.
have got to diversify who we view as experts on a topic
Yeah.
because any expert, I don't care if you've lived in a place for, you're 100 years old, you've been at that place for your whole life,
Yeah.
and you know every single thing about that place. Your perspective and your experience is just that, it's yours.
Yeah.
But no place is occupied by just one person or one type of person.
Yeah.
Everybody has their own perspectives and their own opinions, their own lived experiences. And if you're really serious about sustainability and serious about change, serious about helping people and supporting communities,
Yeah.
you have got to talk to more people. You can't just say, okay, this person, he works at Stanford. He's been here for 40 years. He's written, four New York Times bestsellers. He's the only person that we need to talk to about this issue.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You have got to talk to community members. You got to talk to young people because they are going to inherit this earth once all of us move on, right?
Yeah.
You got to talk to the elders because the elders have been there, done that. They have wisdom that us as like younger people we need to tap into, right? We've forgotten that over time, like the value of listening to our grandmothers and grandfathers and
For
our aunts
sure.
and our
Yeah.
uncles, right? We've forgotten that over time. I just think you got to talk to more people because guess what? No initiative or no endeavor that we take is going to serve everyone. It just isn't. No
Yeah.
solution is going to be perfect for every single person. To try to make something that is just unrealistic.
Yeah.
But I feel like what some people, especially those who are in positions of power, what they tend to do
Yeah.
is they tend to focus on how solutions can positively impact people who are like them
Yeah.
and totally disregard the fact that the majority of people perhaps aren't like you. We're not a part of the 1% or the 0.001%, right?
Yeah.
Um, we don't have perhaps the education backgrounds that they have. We don't have the socioeconomic backgrounds that they have. We don't
Yeah.
have the racial backgrounds that they have, right? And
Yeah.
until you start figuring out solutions and genuinely trying to invest in the overall perspectives of people and a diverse range of perspectives and opinions, your initiatives are never going to serve at least the
Yeah.
majority of people. You'll never serve everybody, but
Yeah.
hopefully, if you're doing the right thing, you can serve um, the majority of people effectively, and
Yeah.
that requires talking to more and more people.
For sure, right? And I think one of my favorite quotes, right, you sort of brought it up or alluded to it, right, is, everybody has a story that you know nothing about, right? And it's your job
Yeah,
as this sort of storyteller to go discover that story, bring it to life, because ultimately that's what's going to convey more meaning and importance, right, than any sort of quote unquote experts, right? Redefining the
yeah,
experts. I think that's just phenomenal. And maybe just sort of on this last note right here, right? I like to end off my podcast by just asking people, right, what advice do you have to someone who's just entering this field of environmental science, right? They don't know where to start, who to approach. And I think the best part about environmental science, right, is it's very interdisciplinary, right? You could be working in the field of math, you could be working in arts, you could be working in film, and there's always a way to tie it back to the environment, right? And it's
yeah,
not just for elderly people, not just for youth, right? You were also talking about how we need more younger people to talk to their grandmothers, right? We need intergenerational collaboration, 80-year-olds being put in the same room as 10-year-olds and just having a topic or having a conversation to discuss. But what do you sort of say to someone who's just entering the field, have no clue where to go, where to start? How can they sort of make this impact so that someday they can get to where you are in terms of being able to create impact in the communities you've been able to do?
yeah. Another phenomenal question. So this one, it may not work for everybody, but I know it has for sure worked for me. And I'm gonna take my glasses off for this one. Uh, so my advice for anybody who's just entering into environmental science,
Yeah,
environmental storytelling, filmmaking, community action, whatever it is,
yeah,
don't fit in, stand out.
yeah,
Don't fit in, stand out.
yeah,
I feel like, especially here in Silicon Valley, right?
yeah,
There is just an overall idea of what that type of person should look and sound like. Like
absolutely.
what a business owner should look or sound like, what an environmentalist should look or sound like, what
Yeah,
sort of education experience they should have, what sort of community they should belong to, or whatever, what kind of clothes they should wear,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um, but here's the situation with that. If and this is just my personal opinion, it might not fit for
absolutely. Yeah,
everybody, right? But if you spend your whole life trying to assimilate and trying to make sure that nothing about you rubs people the wrong way or makes people feel uncomfortable, or just that you don't stand out in a crowd,
true.
guess what? It's going to be that much more difficult for you to ever get, ahead in life.
Yeah,
It's if all you ever do is try and make people comfortable or make feel comfortable or make people like not want to like double take at you, or like maybe take a
sure.
second guess about you or
Yeah,
whatever. You're never going to stand out, and you're just going to end up going with the flow however the flow wants to take you. But for me, I don't look like, I don't dress, I don't look, I don't sound, I don't teach, I don't film like anybody else who like exists in my program, right?
yeah,
I am an individual. When I step into a room, I feel like you have to notice me. Like you're
yeah,
not, I'm not gonna just blend in with the furniture. Like when I step into a room, you're gonna notice me. A part of that is my racial background, right? Like I am a black man in predominantly non-black
yeah.
spaces, especially here at Stanford and in Silicon Valley.
Mhm.
So just racially, I'm gonna be seen as a symbol of diversity. Like there's not gonna be many people in the room who identify like I do, right?
Yeah,
My accent, like I come from the deep South, the deepest you can go in the South, right?
yeah,
So my accent and my vocabulary, my word choice is gonna be much different than people who've grown up on like the Ivy League track or
yeah,
whatever, right? The way I dress, a lot of people here like it's like they all shopping at the same store or something. I
yeah,
don't know. It's like everybody got the same shoes, they got the same shirt, they got the same pants,
yeah,
they got the same haircuts. everything is all the same. And
Yeah.
again, no knock to them, like because fitting in is there's definitely value and novelty to that as well. But me, I
Yeah.
just can't do that. I
Yeah.
can't do that. I can't wear what you wear. I can't try to speak how you speak. I can't drive the car you drive. I have to be my own self because number one, that makes me feel whole as a person by staying true to who I am. And number two, I don't ever want to just fit in. I have something to say. I have a voice. I have a perspective that is
Yeah.
unique in the spaces that I occupy. And if I just sat back and be quiet, how is that ever going to make it easier for people like me to get into those spaces,
Sure.
perhaps even infiltrate the highest levels of those spaces, right?
Yeah.
So I'm a leader. I gotta stand out. I've gotta, put my plant my flag in the ground and let it be known I'm here and I'm not planning on going nowhere. And you could either be uncomfortable and try to make me fit into some box that you've set up for me that
Mm.
is probably, created by the white power structure that has existed in this country
Yeah.
forever, right?
Yeah.
Or you're gonna have to interact with me. You're gonna have to engage with me. Either you're gonna love me or you're gonna hate me, but you're never gonna be impartial. You're never just gonna be vanilla and lukewarm about me,
Absolutely.
and I'm totally comfortable with that. And I think that is probably the primary reason why my career has gone where it's gone because I'm not afraid to be bold. I'm not afraid to be myself and stand out in a crowd.
Yeah.
In fact, I wake up every day with that intention of standing out. Because I don't want anybody to just look at me like furniture. I'm a human. I have something to say, and I'm gonna do everything in my power to ensure that I get my point across.
Yeah. Wow. No, thank you so much, Professor Mason, for those words of wisdom, sharing that with our viewers. I think it's a beautiful line you had, right? Don't fit in, fit out, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
that can resonate to so many youth today as well when they see those sort of classic tracks that, are imposed onto them as a child, right? How can you deviate away from them and choose
Yeah.
what really is going to resonate with you? So thank you so much
Yeah,
for
yeah, yeah, yeah,
your
yeah,
time.
yeah. Listen, and again, it's not just about like film or whatever.
Yeah,
I feel like that. I feel like what I just said can apply to many different forms of life. Listen, if
absolutely.
you want to be viewed as a leader in the classroom,
Yeah,
and like teacher asks a question, nobody wants to answer, raise their hand because they're afraid of looking stupid or having the wrong answer.
yeah,
Put your hand up.
exactly.
Try. Try. There's a pretty girl you go to school with. You want to ask her to prom or whatever. Like, how is your ask gonna be different than everybody else's? You got to stand out
Absolutely.
because if you stand out, whether people love it or they hate it, they know you.
Absolutely.
They have to
One
see
way or
you.
another. Yeah.
And it's nice to be seen. I don't want to be invisible. I want to be seen. So
Yeah.
any realm of life that you can think of, there's a way for you to be bold and to be yourself in those
Yeah.
spaces, and you shouldn't cower away from it. You should embrace it.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much. You had so many wonderful lines there that I'm sure everybody is going to enjoy and love seeing. So thank you so much for taking the time, Professor Mason, to be with us. Thank you so much to all our viewers as well. And we'll see you all in the next episode of Earth Day Every Day. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much. This was really wonderful.